Hello there. Welcome to Algebra 8-4. The title of this is Multiplying Special Cases. And this is going to be one of those unusual lessons where I'm actually going to encourage you to look for patterns so that you can do this in your head. And I'm going to show you two types of special cases where it would really be helpful for you as factoring gets more difficult to be able to identify these two patterns for you. So just kind of keep that in the back of your mind, and I'll talk more about that as we go through. If you have not filled this out for your paper, please do. There's the first example that we're going to do. It says the square of a binomial. It says multiply the quantity. That parentheses is important. Parentheses x plus 8, and then the power of 2 is outside the parentheses. So let's talk about first of all what that means and work through that problem together for you. Let me grab my pen here. Okay, so the first thing that you need to realize is that this means, okay, what that means is this. It means parenthesis x plus 8 parenthesis times x plus 8. Okay, that's the first place that you need to be aware of. Here's what it is not. All right, this is important. I'll do this in red because no, do not do this. Somebody's going to do this because it's natural to think this. It's natural to think that that just means x squared plus 64 squared. That is not what that is. No, do not do that. That's an error. That's wrong. Okay, no, don't do that. Let me show you what actually happens here. Let's work this out based on what we learned in the previous lesson where we multiply each term times each term. If we take this times this, we get x squared. And if we take this times this, we get 8x. And then we continue, and we multiply these two, and we get another 8x. And if we continue here, we get 8 times 8 is 64. Now you do have to look for those like terms and put those together and get x squared plus 8x. I'm sorry, that's not 8x. I can't add it. It's 16. You go ahead and do it right while I correct it here. 8x plus 16. X. 8 plus 8 is 16x combined like terms plus 64. Okay, that is the answer there. Okay, so one way to do this problem is to just multiply it out and do not do this. Do not just try to think that that's what it is, because that is not the same thing there at all. Okay, now what I would like to point out here, I'm going to use a different color, is notice that you have right here 8x plus 8x. All right, so I'm just going to make a note that you have two 8x's, 2 times 8x, and add that to your notes because that's going to be helpful for us. And also notice that 8 is the same number that was in the problem. All right, so when it is set up that way, we ended up adding this number times that number twice, okay, which is what that is. Now, I'll get more into what that means here in a second. Okay, do a dotted line in your notes there, or put a break in it, however you're doing the notes, and we'll try to show you why it is that we want to be able to do this. All right, first of all, we got two questions here we're going to work out next. Let's do the first one. Copy that down. You should be on the same side of the paper probably. Let's just say we have a plus b squared. Okay, based on what I just said, that means we have the quantity a plus b times the quantity a plus b. So if we did our multiplication trick here we have a squared plus, now a times b, that's just written AB. A times B is the only way we can write that. B times A, that's the same thing as AB. It doesn't matter if it's AB, BA. So we need to know that it matches that term right there. And B times B is B squared. Now we need to combine our like terms here, and we need to call that A squared plus 2AB plus B squared. Okay, so this is actually an algebraic fact and pattern that is always true when we have binomials written in this form, where we have the same binomial that's multiplied by itself. This term right here will always match that term squared. this term squared, b times b, will always match that term right there. Okay, and this term in the middle will always be 2 times a, which is this term, times b, that is this term. And if you can catch that pattern, again, when we get into the more difficult factoring, if you can catch that pattern, life will be a lot easier for you. I would like you at some point to look at page 504 in your book as they discuss this pattern. It is called the square of a binomial. The square of a binomial, it means you have a binomial squared. Right there, we'll always get this pattern where, again, this term is the first term squared. This term is the number 2, and there's a 2 in there because there's always 2 of those terms. 1, 2, 2 terms times a times b plus this last term squared. It always works. All right, let me go back to the previous problem that's on your page. All right, this term, if a was x and b was 8, okay, x squared goes there. B squared, that's 8 times 8 is 64. And then notice this term right here is 2 times 8 times x, which was 2 times a times b, which was equal to 16x. That will always be true. And the same thing is true. If that's a minus sign, it actually will work out the same way, except the only difference is it will be a squared minus 2a plus b squared. Because the minus sign, you'd have a negative ab and a negative ab based on that subtraction sign right there. So we need to know these rules right here. And I want to show you on the next slide how we can apply that, okay, to do these problems in our head. But it goes back to this pattern that I just showed you. And again, you can read more about on page 504 in your book. And there's some follow-up examples on the next page in this book. I would encourage you to do that while we're doing some work there. So let's do a dotted line there. Let's look at an example. All right, so this is already on your paper. You don't have to rewrite what's on the right there. Whoops. But that should be in your notes over there. This part here should be in your notes where I'm erasing. I didn't mean to write that blue line. So according to this, all right, the first thing that you have to do is notice that this is the square of a binomial. You have to notice that first for this to work. You see, it's a binomial squared. So we know that means x minus 5 times the quantity x minus 5. Now it is a minus sign, so I'm going to consider this pattern right here. My first term is going to be whatever a squared is. Okay, so a, you can think of it like this. A is what x is x. So I'm going to square that. I'm going to say x squared. Now it's a minus sign. Minus. Now the last term is this term squared. 5 times 5 is 25. All right, and I know it's a subtraction sign. So the middle term, that's the hardest part, is 2 times a times b. So b is really 5. So you see how I'm just looking at it like a minus b, where the x is like the a in this pattern. B is like the 5. So that middle term, and again, this should get to where you can actually do this in your head. If you're not doing it in your head for the test, you can write it out. That's okay. It will just make your life easier if you can. The middle term is the number 2, right? It's the number 2 times a, which in this case is x, times 5, which is b. So 2 times 5 is 10, and the middle term is x. See it? And that is actually the answer. You can multiply it out long ways if you want by going x minus 5 times x minus 5, but that's what it is. All right, and it's great when you can see that pattern. Let's do one more quick one, see if I can squeeze it into this video before we go on. Here's another one. All right, so let's do it quickly. All right, it's like that is the a and that is the b. Okay, so it's kind of like a, and again, you would get to where you would do this in your head. A is 3x and b is 4. It is, I do notice it is a binomial squared, so it's the square of a binomial, just recognizing that pattern. So I'm going to use this, basically this pattern right here. My first term is a squared. All right, so a squared is 3x times 3x. Well, 3x times 3x is 9x squared. All right, I'll do the last term. The last term is b squared. Well, if b is 4, 4 times 4 is 16. All right, now here's the tricky part. The middle term is going to be a times b, which is 3x, 2, because it's this 2 right here, times a, which is 3x, times b, which is 4. So I have to multiply that out. 3 times 2 is 6. 6 times 4 is 24. It'd be 24x. So it's plus 24x there. And that's actually, in this next assignment, when I see you, I would actually encourage you on this time to do these in your head and see if you can correctly do them in your head. Okay, that's the first special case. I'm going to have to stop it here, and I'll do my next video for the second special case.